Texans today, everybody. I'm your host, Jeremy Chuggs, and coming up on the program today, the latest draft visits for your Houston Texans. Some top 30 guys, and they had their local prospect day, so a ton of guys. You'll see a lot of guys from U of H, from Rice, guys who went to high school around the Houston area, all visited with the Houston Texans, and we have the perfect fit for the Texans in round one and the most likely pick for the Texans in round one. I'll tell you what some NFL draft experts think the Texans are going to do in round one of the 2025 NFL draft. But speaking of draft experts, I'll be with an NFL insider this Wednesday for our special pre-draft special live show here on Texans Today with my man Aaron Wilson. This Wednesday, April 16th at 5 p.m. Central Time, me and Aaron will be going live answering all your questions around the 2025 NFL draft and the Houston Texans. So if you want to join in on the action, if you want your question answered, make sure to tap in, hit that sub button, and turn on your notifications, and be there Wednesday for our special pre-draft live show. Now, let's get into the latest draft visits for your Houston Texans. Aireontae Ersery, offensive tackle from Minnesota, a top 30 visit with your Houston Texans. And if it's not known, the Texans are looking for offensive linemen in the 2025 NFL draft. Aireontae Ersery has that round one, round two grade. Some mocks have him sneaking into the end of round one. I would hope the Texans are looking at him at more of a round two grade, a round two prospect for the team. But as we're looking at this Texans offensive line depth chart, it is still a big mystery whether or not the Texans feel comfortable with their tackle situation with Cam Robinson and Blake Fisher, whether they're going to go a tackle early like Ersery or Connerly Jr., or they're going to go with an interior guy to help with one of the guard spots or maybe even that center spot for the Houston Texans. Now, here are the top 30 visits for the Texans so far for offensive linemen. Ersery joins Gray Zabel from North Dakota State, Luke Newman from Michigan State, Chase Lunt from UConn, and Charles Grant from William & Mary, as well as Josh Connerly from Oregon. Like I said, safe to say the Texans will take an offensive lineman early on in the 2025 NFL draft. Will it be an interior guy? Will it be a tackle? Also, will it be the first selection the Texans make, or do they feel comfortable with the depth of this offensive line class to take one in round two, to take one in round three? Because a lot of these top 30 visits have been day two, day three guys for the Houston Texans. Josh Connerly probably and Gray Zabel, the two guys who I think are round one somewhat locks at this point that the Texans have met with. But I want to hear from you folks at home. What position should the Texans draft first? Because I think everybody agrees, O-line and wide receiver, the two weakest positions on this Texans team right now. Do you think they need to take an O-lineman first? Or should they look at one of these wide receivers early on in the 2025 NFL draft? Maybe if Matthew Golden somehow slips in this draft. Let me know down in the comment section, what do you think the Texans should do? Because the other draft visit the Texans had, Tre Harris from Ole Miss, one of my guys. I've been talking about Tre Harris the past month, and I love his fit with the Houston Texans. The Texans bringing him in on a top 30 visit. Another day two, round two or round three kind of guy in Tre Harris. And the Texans have met with 4 wide receivers / tight ends. I'll call them receiving threats so far for top 30 visits. They've met with Tre Harris, Kyle Williams, Matthew Golden, who my producer Big Tex absolutely loves from the University of Texas, and Elijah Arroyo from the University of Miami. I think the Texans are kind of covering all their bases with these receiving threats, right? You have a day one, you have day two, day three guys. Matthew Golden being that round one guy. If he falls, I think if he doesn't get there at pick 25, you maybe see the Texans waiting till round two or round three to get a guy like a Kyle Williams or a Tre Harris or a receiving option like an Elijah Arroyo. So the Texans kind of covering all their bases with these draft visits so far. And speaking of draft visits, coming up in just a moment, I'm going to tell you all the local guys the Texans met with this past weekend. The Texans had their local draft visit day where basically anybody that went to college at University of Houston, Rice, anything around the Houston area, College Station, or if they went to high school in Houston, all those guys are allowed to visit with the Houston Texans, and they don't have to use a top 30 visit. Somebody who also wasn't on the list, but I think is also going to be classified as a local visit for your Houston Texans. I'll talk about that coming up in the program, but I couldn't do today's show if it wasn't for our amazing sponsors over at Game Time. Get started today with the official ticketing partner of Texans Today here at Chat Sports. We all use Game Time. We absolutely love it. You can get great deals on last-second tickets and even see your seat view before you buy the tickets. All-in prices show you what you pay without hidden fees or expenses. And Game Time has zone deals. You pick the section, Game Time picks the seats for an average saving of 18%. You can get great deals on last-second tickets. And like I said, it is my place to get those last-second deals. You can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy shows, theater, and more. And as I mentioned, the Rockets, they're in the playoffs. So if you want to get a round one playoff game, now we don't know who the Rockets are playing just yet. It could be the Grizzlies. It could be the Warriors. But regardless of who they play, you're going to want to go and support H-Town, go and support the Rockets because they're the number 2 seed. They had an amazing year. Why not go support them in person with our friends over at Game Time? They have great deals as the event gets closer. And with the new Game Time Picks feature, it filters out all the fluff and shows you the very best deals on the app, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use code CHATSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CHATSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it? You know what time it is. It's game time. Now, let's look at these local visits for your Houston Texans. We're just going to kind of cycle through all these guys. You'll notice a lot of these guys went to Houston, Rice, A&M, Texas, and I think Houston is probably Houston and Dallas are two of the best NFL franchises to have local visits because the amount of talent that comes out of Houston and Dallas in high school talent, like for football, is astronomical. So a lot of these guys visiting with the Houston Texans, some of them could easily be later round picks, round 4, round 5, round 6, but the Texans getting a closer look at a lot of these guys who grew up in the Houston area. Now coming up next, the perfect fit for the Texans in round 1. Do we know who the perfect fit is? Well, one NFL insider believes so, and he thinks Emeka Egbuka, the wide receiver from Ohio State, would be the most absolute perfect fit for your Houston Texans. And here's exactly what he had to say. Marcus Mosher had this to say on Egbuka to the Texans. Nico Collins is one of the league's top receivers, but there are plenty of questions with the rest of the wide receiver room. Tank Dell will miss the entire 2025 season. Christian Kirk is on a one-year deal, and he's been unable to stay healthy during the last several seasons. That's why Emeka Egbuka makes so much sense, as he is the ideal number 2 receiver to pair with Collins for the foreseeable future. And this is no secret that the Texans have been looking at Emeka Egbuka. Obviously had his best year at Ohio State with C.J. Stroud as his quarterback. There's already a rapport there. He's a round 1 wide receiver, I think, behind Tet McMillan, behind Matthew Golden. He has an argument to be that third best receiver in this class, maybe up there with a Luther Burden, or depending on how you see him, a Jaden Higgins or a Jalen Noel. But Egbuka is very talented, and I think the fit with the Texans does make sense. They need another wide receiver threat. He already has that rapport with C.J. Stroud. The question is, does it make sense to take him in round 1 when you might have a glaring need on offensive linemen, and you could possibly take one of those guys there? So my question to you is this. If C.J. Stroud wants Emeka Egbuka, because later on in that article, he talks about, Cade Stover was a Ohio State guy, and the Texans ended up drafting him this past year. If C.J. Stroud wants Egbuka, should Nick Caserio and DeMeco Ryans listen to him and, I'm not going to say cave in, but maybe please your QB1, please your franchise guy? Let me know your thoughts on this down in the comment section, because personally, I think if it's a close enough comparison between Emeka Egbuka and the next guy you have on your draft board, maybe a Josh Connerly, maybe, maybe a Gray Zabel, depending on who it is, does that push Emeka Egbuka up a little bit? Does that give him the upper hand if C.J. Stroud is in the ear of Nick Caserio, in the ear of DeMeco Ryans, saying, hey, I know we have other holes, but I know I can ball out with Egbuka. I know that he can add something to this Texans offense with new offensive coordinator Nick Caserio. Something to keep in mind. I'm interested to see what you have to say down in the comments section, because it obviously isn't all up to Stroud. He's not the final decision maker on what the Texans do in the draft. But as the QB1, he should have some say, right? Right? He should have some say in who the Texans take, especially at the wide receiver position. Now, from the best fit to the most likely fit, Josh Simmons, another Ohio State guy, the offensive tackle, has been marked as the most likely pick for the Houston Texans in the 2025 NFL draft. I was actually looking on a website, and it kind of tells you, out of all mock drafts, which guys are the most mocked to certain teams, right? And Josh Simmons, you can go 1 week back, you can go 2 weeks back, you can even go the past month. Josh Simmons is the most mocked player to the Houston Texans on an average basis. Over the past week, he's been mocked to the Houston Texans 31% of times in mock drafts. So Josh Simmons, is he the most likely pick for the Houston Texans in round 1? And I was actually looking at this, and it had me thinking, right? If the Texans want to draft a true left tackle, if they want to take a Kelvin Banks, if they want to take a Josh Simmons, maybe a Josh Connerly, doesn't it make sense to take one in round 1? I know I've been a person that's saying, oh, maybe you trade back into the early round 2. Maybe you trade back with, I don't know, the Cleveland Browns or the New York Giants, maybe one of those teams reaching for a quarterback. But if I'm the Texans and I want to draft a true left tackle, if I'm looking for a left tackle of the future, I feel like it kind of makes sense to stay in round 1, because you can get that fifth-year option and help extend him later on and keep him a Houston Texan, whoever you drafted in round 1. Because if you're drafting an offensive tackle, a left tackle in round 1, the hope, the thought is that this is going to be your left tackle moving forward for the foreseeable future, be the blindside guy for C.J. Stroud. And if that's the case, kind of helping you down the road a little bit more, if you have a first-round pick, you get a fifth-year option on that first-round pick. Second-round pick, third-round pick, you don't get a fifth-year option. So if you're taking a position as important as a left tackle, and that's why I think some of these teams at the end of round 2 could want to trade up into round 1 to take a quarterback. Because if you're going to take a Shedeur Sanders, a Jackson Dart, a Jalen Milroe, one of these guys, it kind of makes a little bit more sense to have that fifth-year option on that rookie deal, because you're getting them in the first round. And as we go back to the Texans' top 30 visits along the offensive line, the only two guys that I think are for sure round 1 guys, Josh Connerly Jr., Gray Zabel, but Josh Simmons definitely fits that mark as well, depending on where he goes in round 1. And we talked about local visits, and I kind of alluded to somebody else being a local visit that didn't go to the local pro day. And I feel like the Texans local pro day is for guys who are, striving to be picked in the draft, right? They're guys who, from U of H, from Rice, some local guys who may not have some draft pedigree and are trying to slip into the late rounds of the draft. Donovan Jackson is not one of those guys. He's a round 1 guy, maybe beginning of round 2. He can also be a local visit. And I don't think a guy of Jackson's stature would go to one of those, local draft pro days like the Texans had this past weekend. But he can still meet with the Texans and it not be classified as a top 30 visit. He grew up in Bel Air, Texas. I believe he went to Cypress, one of the Cypress schools for his high school. But Donovan Jackson could definitely be a local visit that the Texans don't have to necessarily publicize or go out there and say, hey, everybody, we're meeting with Donovan Jackson. But somebody you still have to keep your eye on. I know it's like beating an old drum, but I truly think Donovan Jackson, if he's on the board in round 1 for the Houston Texans, has a high chance of being that selection at pick 25. Look out for my man, Donovan Jackson. Now, that's all I have for you on today's show, folks. Make sure you hit me up on Twitter at Jeremy Chugs. And if you made it to the end of the video, why not hit that sub button for daily Texans videos all year long, 100% for free.